Chapter 75, Demon Eye Part 2-2. The transport vehicle drove onto the high-speed magnetic rail, shaking off the group of people from Quantum Corporation far in the distance. A headless corpse sat quietly within the confines of the vehicle. Jack's demon eye used the illuminating flames to take a cold look at everything inside the vehicle, from above the mutilated and broken neck. The conflict just now had caused quite the mess within the vehicle. Two bodies used to be placed down here, but they were tossed around to be all over the place from the effects of inertia. Jack's corpse was deeper inside. It had been knocked under a seat right now. Rui Wen's body was curled up. Her hands were tightly bound together by the powerful M shackles. She was a bit closer to the demon eye. Actually, Jack already lost all interest in the other headless corpse. Even if that used to be his body, the body that had gone through alterations time and time again, no longer held any meaning once the Dynamo Core was extracted out from it. The sole emotion that his old corpse stirred up was contempt. The same feeling of contempt was felt against the corpse he was currently possessing. This burner's body used to be quite decent, but after crossing paths with Rui Wen, half its body seemed to be completely crippled. Its right hand was broken, and right now its head had been splattered by an attack. It had changed from an oil tank that could barely supply Jack with energy to a tattered water sack that couldn't even be repaired. The power system of the Deep Blue Walker was what was genuinely providing him with energy. It was the block of originum stored in the backup power supply. Oh, that's right. Fine metal threads like nothingness probed out from the mutilated and severed neck. They pierced inside a different exoskeleton armor to form an ad hoc parallel power draw structure. The armor had been taken off by Wall 5. The power supply was half full, and it also contained a block of originum in reserve. Perfect. He sighed with emotion as fine threads manifested from the structure to bore through in a flowing and meticulous manner. It was inconceivably exquisite. Then, when his gaze switched over to Rui Wen's body, a different emotion flourished. Its name. Greed. The glow of flames circulated upon the demon eye, causing the fine thread structure to transmit with the subtle vibration of a rippling light. It was unbroken as one. I must have been possessed in the past. Such a perfect body was placed before my eyes, and I actually wanted to destroy her. Those idiots, and that includes the previous me, don't realize where the value of this body lies at all. The gaze continued to sweep across Rui Wen's body. A deep scan revealed to him a cauterized injury caused by the piercing of the high-speed particle cannon, and several wounds in the form of internal swelling and deformation. Jack even felt somewhat of a heartache coming on. I must do a detailed examination of this body in the future. I hope that the radiation didn't cause any irreversible injuries. Then, if everything goes smoothly, the Dynamo Core can live as a parasite using this body as a host. With a careful arrangement of the Dynamo Core's configuration, it can fuse as one with Rui Wen's original soul configuration and ability configuration. Nothing would be further ideal than that. It doesn't matter if she is a girl. This body represents unlimited potential. Oh, soul configuration. His thoughts had arrived at this point. A different piece of information suddenly stood out after being slipped over. It made Jack suddenly be on guard. The demonic eye suddenly flared, switching through several different detection methods in a flash. He scanned within the vehicle, especially giving the surrounding area of Rui Wen's body several more scans. In the end, He used the amplifier installed within the exoskeleton armor to transform signals and let out a buzzing sound. "Youngster, how long are you going to keep hiding for?" The vehicle was a sheet of silence. There was no reply at all. The flame of the demon eye stared, dead fixed upon Rui Wen's body. "It looks like you want to protect this girl. Your soul configuration strength was extremely amazing back in the apartment." "It's so funny." Yan Yongbo and the others had thought this ability belonged to Rui Wen's body. This just exposes their ignorance in soul science. The vehicle's interior was buzzing from the vibration of the amplifier, but there still wasn't any significant information that appeared. Jack laughed in a low voice. Youngsters always overestimate their own patience, and they overestimate the patience of others at the same time. The exoskeleton armor suddenly punched out, bringing with it a whistling wind. The fist smashed directly down upon Rui Wen's head. The hard knuckles already touched Rui Wen's temple and even slightly pressed into her skin. But in the end, the fist froze still and stopped. Jack maintained this stance for quite a while. He was anticipating the tetrahedron figure, but he had yet to see it. Or perhaps he was waiting for some other response. This time he was truly puzzled. Did he make a mistake in judgment? Or maybe this ability really did come from Rui Wen? Jack thought of the time back in the Deshang building with the thorny big fellow and the youngster possessing a super-large sensing range. Jack's mind was rather filled with an apprehensive feeling that was hard to get rid of. Yes, it was this feeling of apprehension that turned so distinct. If his transplant was truly successful, he would become an absolutely real and boundless existence of life. He just needed time. Then the city's public service system transmitted over information at this time. "Maintenance is being performed on the magnetic rail ahead. Please switch to a different traffic layer. The next switching area is 100 meters ahead." The digital map had already provided an open route. Jack's demon eye flickered once again. He paid no heed to the indication. The speed of the vehicle didn't decrease, but increased as it charged its way through. The radio waves of various systems of obstruction, control, and authority interweaved in the empty air, all seeking to control the crazily advancing transport vehicle. But under the comprehensive control of the Dynamo Core, all attempts to link with the vehicle were absolutely meaningless. Jack fed signals into the amplifier to laugh with a muffled laugh, using this sort of senseless method. He was the undefeated demon king in this AI-ified metropolis. It didn't matter what warrior from what power and what direction. The feeling of disdain and conceit was quite nice. Ho 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 ho. This sort of feeling of superiority was especially wonderful. The demon eye painted the interior of the vehicle with a blood-red luster. It was dazzling, but people would find it hard to get a good feeling from it. Luo Nan watched this devilish scene with rapt attention, his heart exceptionally calm. Even though Jack was dealing with the changing situation outside the vehicle, his scanning and monitoring of the inside never faltered. Luo Nan knew of Jack's fear towards him. No, a proper description was that Luo Nan could see it. Luo Nan had laid hidden for a long time already. He had been guarding Rui Wen by her side ever since the moment she took on the particle cannon and fell unconscious. He had tried to use his old methods to rouse Rui Wen's consciousness and restore her state. But soon Luo Nan discovered that this task was hard to accomplish within a short period of time. The seriousness of Rui Wen's injury far exceeded his expectation. The high-speed particle's kinetic assault had wrecked several of her inner organs, and had also destroyed the musical foundation of her harmonious melody. Forcefully switching tempos under these conditions would only make the recall kill everything. Luo Nan could only guard Rui Wen by her side and expedite communications with the reinforcements of the society. The members of the society, under He Yueyin's arrangements, were already prepared to intercept Quantum Corporation's fleet halfway. But then Jack's appearance made a mess of everyone's plans. The society was making adjustments to their deployments, and Luo Nan remained standing guard within the vehicle. He had seen with his own eyes Jack's bizarre, yet interesting change in state. Yes, it was extremely interesting. Chapter 76, The Tower of Babel Part. A man's emotions and thoughts were abundant and colorful. One would only take these words to be a sort of description under normal circumstances. But right now Jack was the embodiment of these words. Energy spurred the flow of information, signals back and forth, atop the fine thread structure manifested by the Dynamo Core. Through this special structure, the signals endlessly assembled and converged, collided and transformed. The final products were intent, emotions, and thoughts. During this process, the energy emitted a multi-colored luster while it was doing work. Some sort of unique pattern and tempo were hidden and stored within, flashing and flickering. The pattern was consistent from beginning to end, but the tempo was random. Two core elements, one of stillness and one of movement, assembled together to form a structure that made one face the tempo of life head-on. It was no longer a stiff template. It was undeniably and undoubtedly the pulsation of the soul. Perhaps it was just as Jack had said. His life had entered a completely new form because of the existence of this structure. Luo Nan felt that he was watching precisely an educational film about the nature of the soul. When looking from a physical point of view, man's consciousness could be simply understood as a series of nerves and neurotransmitters, the transmission of electrical signals. This was the motor that was formed through the long survival of the human race, through evolution. This was the joint effect of a loopback mechanism. But several top researchers were convinced that the marvelous activity of the human consciousness had a deeper origin to its operation. There should be an even more essential model that would take all these signals, these mechanisms, and use special structures to integrate them. An efficient system, a synergetic system that was greater than the sum of its parts. The soul stemmed from this. Luo Nan approved these views as someone who possessed a superpower, as a believer in formatting theory. Frankly speaking, the words soul configuration that Jack had spoken was truly a marvelous term. Its hidden meaning was linked with formatting theory. The link was solid and vivid, but realistically speaking, it was easier said than done trying to find such a system that integrated all information, especially when using direct observation to look at the exquisite geometry of the structure to reverse engineer the system. To a very large degree, this was only a sort of delusion that was above reasonable meaning. But then Luo Nan actually discovered something similar right at this time. Not bad, it was what formed the core of Jack's demon eye. It was the fine thread structure of the Dynamo Core supported by the energy of two exoskeleton armors. Though it was crude, though it was just a piece, Luo Nan could see, with his unique viewpoint up in the air looking downwards, something astonishing. He could see a grand construction that took his breath away. Energy and information that could be physically observed and felt on the material plane were traveling within this construction. From the bottom to the top, they converged and collided endlessly. They climbed step by step. They transformed from simple thoughts and basic feelings to advanced intentions and emotions to enter once again into the purely mental temple. Yes, this was a building constructed upon the material plane of reality. This was the Tower of Babel that led from reality to the mental plane of the void. Even though this building belonged to Jack, nothing was stopping Luo Nan from enjoying its marvels. It made Luo Nan applaud in admiration. This was because his understanding and appreciation of this marvel had already touched upon the essential level. From the perspective of reality, all of Jack's activity within this Tower of Babel, including intent, emotion, and thought, were practically not a mystery at all under Luo Nan's observations. And so, Jack's recent probings and threats were extremely laughable from Luo Nan's perspective. Luo Nan would find out a step sooner than Jack about Jack discovering him. Though Luo Nan found it funny, he was vigilant. Energy and information can be simultaneously received on the mental plane and the material plane. Perhaps one is more efficient than the other. But if the energy and information are too pure, breaking away from neurotransmitters and chemical carriers, then the inherent encryption by the human body is lost. Everything is then completely exposed on a higher plane of observation, dispersing the darkness like a bonfire within the night. Yet this bonfire can also attract unknown dangers. For instance, right now Jack didn't know that there was such a person, with a view like a god's, who was completely observing all of his thoughts and behaviors. Jack's feelings had rapidly changed due to his state of life. He wasn't used to it yet. His feelings were clearly too intense, but his logic was not affected. He was fully aware that enemies were on all sides of him within this city. After breaking through the first obstacle, he planned his next route and had the vehicle descend on its journey. He was preparing to return to the recycling stratum that he was most familiar with. Then he began to make preparations for the fierce coming battle to break out of the encirclement. He rapidly dismantled another exoskeleton armor as well as his original corpse. Jack's train of thought was very clear. He had been an altered human. His previous body was equipped with several precision instruments of great effectiveness, some of which wouldn't even be found in the possession of the Deep Blue platform. He needed to do his utmost to integrate these instruments together and have them exhibit greater utility. This was very easy for him. All he needed to do was to have the Dynamo Core split off a fine thread and link with these instruments and components. It was lifelike, as it linked the information of each of these together closely. All he had to do was a bit of architectural design work. Luo Nan shook his head within his mind as he watched the pace of Jack's work. From his perspective, Jack's approach was completely wrong. The true purpose of the Tower of Babel was to build a bridge leading from the material to the mental, breaking apart the barrier between the physical and the spiritual. Even though the alteration that Jack pieced together increased his combat strength by a very large degree, at most, this was the equivalent of building a new structure at the base of this grand Tower of Babel, a military fort made from piling brick and stone. Compared to the body of the Tower of Babel, which pierced the heavens, what was the point of the short fort? Even if the fort was built more firmly, all of Jack's emotions and thoughts continued to be exposed to the full light of day. His soul had been reborn, but he had yet to be completely pure and calm. He was still being affected by the ripples of intense emotions. The truly fatal problem was that Jack did not resolve anything at all. It looked like what Jack said to Yan Yongbo about his Dynamo Core technology being incomplete. was certainly expressed quite honestly. Luo Nan's mind stirred as his thoughts arrive at this point. His soul body descended slowly from a position far from the material plane to extend out with a probing hand. Perhaps all he needed was a light grip. The fingers of his soul body touched lightly the membrane to the material plane. Like lightly tapping the surface of an undisturbed deep lake, fine, unobservable waves were roused within. Jack's demon eye suddenly flared. His sitting body suddenly sprung up, bringing with him a few broken, unintegrated components to fall to the ground with a jangle. When the clamor passed, the inside of the vehicle was covered by a nearly solid sheet of silence. Jack maintained his stance for a full minute, but Luo Nan had already returned fully to the deepest depths accessible on the mental plane. He didn't give Jack a chance to discover him at all. Jack sat back down after confirming that he wasn't able to lock onto the suspicious signal. He muttered to himself for a moment before picking up the multifaceted helmet that he had always disregarded. At the same time, the Dynamo Core split off a fine thread to pull over the robotic eye system from the side. After about 2 minutes of alteration, the helmet was reattached to the torso of the armor. The robotic eye lit up with a dark red glow after being integrated with the diamond-shaped visor. Luo Nan started laughing when he saw this scene. Chapter 76, The Tower of Babel Part 2-2. If Jack wasn't carrying so many useless components, he would completely be taken for a mighty deep blue walker with his helmet on. However, this deep blue walker's mind was stretched extremely taut. The suspicious signal had given him an intense unease that wasn't easy to eliminate. Installing the robotic eye was just a start. There were still several advanced detection instruments within Jack's previous body. Right now, they took priority. They were disassembled and integrated into Jack's current exoskeleton armor. Jack constantly turned his head during the installation process. He let his robotic eye guide all the detection instruments within his body, surveying the inner environment of the vehicle over and over again. But no matter how many times he surveyed, Jack was unable to seize the suspicious signal once again. But from another perspective, every detection survey wasn't completely meaningless. Large quantities of data passed through the Tower of Babel using this method. A highly efficient convergence and combining were realized through this unique structure. Every survey stood for a deeper level of understanding towards the world by Jack. This was something Jack had never experienced before. Luo Nan's evaluation towards this was as follows. Jack was on the right path. After being frightened by Luo Nan, Jack's altered train of thought clearly exhibited changes. He no longer chased after increasing his immediate combat strength. He integrated the detection and scanning equipment to the best of his ability to guard against the incorporeal and traceless threat. From Luo Nan's perspective, this stuck closer to the essence of configuration over the military fort-style alteration. Namely, Jack was raising perception and awareness capabilities. He was endlessly enriching the source and level of information. He was strengthening the quality of integrated thought. He was climbing upon this grand Tower of Babel from the bottom levels to the top levels, from the concrete to the abstract, to reach the absolute mental domain. Looking at the long term, Jack would certainly be able to reap some gains if he were to persevere in this sort of alteration method. He would find it easier to exhibit power on the mental plane. Was Luo Nan helping Jack make a breakthrough? Obviously, he wasn't. He was just looking favorably on Jack's alterations. There was something that existed within Jack's body that made it impossible to make up for an error. His emotional thought process still had no defenses whatsoever. It would be hard for him to find a suitable medium within a short time frame. It didn't matter whether it was his emotions or his thoughts. They were all the foundation of the soul, and they were all laid bare in this way. Jack's soul was tantamount to being completely defenseless. At least in Luo Nan's eyes, Jack was incomparably weak. Luo Nan didn't intervene before because Jack was maintaining a good habit. Jack was doing the utmost to maintain a synchronized tempo between his body and mind. It was like Rui Wen's body and soul merging. He possessed a powerful defensive strength against purely mental attacks. But this kind of synchronized tempo possessed extremely harsh demands. For instance, Rui Wen, who was stronger, needed to constantly adjust the state of her body to constantly maintain her calm and level mental state. Only in this way could she maintain her peak level within intense combat. Compared to Rui Wen, the current Jack's range of emotional fluctuations was huge. At the same time, Jack was endlessly altering his ad hoc body. His line of thought over the alterations was not completely the same from the start to the end. Even if he had the Dynamo Core in the middle as a mediator, there was a large probability for it all to come apart. Jack had found the proper direction. He endlessly raised the strength and level of his soul. But the failure thought-style alteration he made before would eventually cause more and more serious influences towards his synchronized tempo. Perhaps Jack would eventually discover this problem, but Luo Nan wouldn't allow Jack the chance to resolve it. Take the boundary between the material plane and the mental plane to be a water's surface, for instance. Jack, this fat fish that resided in the material plane, was endlessly leaping out through the water's surface to breathe in fresh air. Luo Nan was like a patient hunter, waiting for his prey to exit the water to the greatest degree. He even prepared a special weapon for his prey. The dark chains and the Wraith Sign glowed with a subtle light. Obviously, the weapon that Luo Nan prepared was the siege hammer. The human-faced arachnid was directly participating in order to maintain the attack's effectiveness. However, there was a change right now that fell outside of Luo Nan's plans. The human-faced arachnid was in the middle of recovery when it changed its attitude of avoidance towards Jack. It actually became a bit restless. When Jack's form of life transformed, this dark side of life form's view changed from Jack's nature being completely unable to be eaten to being, maybe it could give him a try. More importantly, within the depths of Jack's soul was another spiritual seed being nurtured. While it was true that this seed was far in purity from Rui Wen's seed, which was untainted by even a speck dust, it changed Jack's flavor to be like a meat that was sprinkled with a bit of hot pepper. It could be eaten with some effort. In spite of its current weak state, the human-faced arachnid struggled once more and transformed into a somewhat illusory figure. It made its intense desire to consume clear to its master in this way. Luo Nan was somewhat hesitant. Then the Hexia transmitted information through the psychic wave network onto the mental plane while Luo Nan was pondering. Luo Nan's soul body received this information. It was a format that was both energy and information. It was traveling on both the mental and material plane. What the Hexia was doing far exceeded Jack's current level. Luo Nan could confirm that the Hexia was encoding the energy and information. A typical wiretapping wouldn't cause any effects. However, even though the psychic waves were encoded, they weren't traceless. In particular, the unique waveband that transitioned from the material plane to the mental plane was like a light breeze blowing across the surface of a lake. There would be some special ripples left behind on the material plane. Luo Nan was unable to feel this before, but he became more and more sensitive to this after grasping the key to soul breathing. Right now, he was a bit displeased though. This was because Jack wasn't an ordinary person. Jack's wholeless observation abilities were gradually increasing. This weak ripple didn't escape Jack's attention. Various detection instruments assembled together in an instant to actively probe various wavebands, seemingly burning a hole through the void. But this was useless. Currently, Luo Nan's soul body had absolute dominance over the mental plane. He could probe on a deeper and subtle level. In comparison, Jack's human-made devices were far too crude, even if some were able to probe onto the mental plane. No matter their precision, their scope, they were far from meeting the demands necessary to seize Luo Nan's existence. And so Luo Nan was able to receive the signals with ease. He used this sort of method to provoke Jack's sensitive nerves. He Yueyin was on the other side. Scout, the target has been locked on. You can rest your soul-attached crow for the time being. Concentrate on observing the various sniper positions in the surroundings. Mr. Bai will contact you in a bit. Cragburst's muffled laughter was transmitted across. Clearly, he had seen through He Yueyin's schemes of abusing her authority. Luo Nan disregarded He Yueyin's proposal. He had forced his soul-attached crow to fly over from the Dashang building. The journey had been nearly 50 kilometers long, but the crow hadn't even spent half an hour. Its speed exceeded 100 kilometers per hour. The crow's energy was overdrafted no matter how one looked at it. It was highly likely that this would lead to unforeseen consequences to the state of the attached soul. No wonder He Yueyin had expressed her dissatisfaction in this manner. Chapter 77, Demonic Transformation, Part 1-2. God was always watching, but Luo Nan was quite innocent right now. He didn't even attach his soul to ink after all. From his understanding, ink was supported by his soul breathing, successfully joining the draft of the surrounding air. Each flap of the crow's wing seemed to merge together with the night sky. Ink was simply piloting the wind as it flew, so it used next to nothing in energy. Luo Nan didn't know just how satisfied Ink was. All right, Luo Nan never expected that the reinforcement of soul breathing would have such great results. It clearly didn't increase Ink's upper limit, but it gave Ink a state incomparable. It let Ink display 150% of its abilities. Luo Nan copied this from Rui Wen. No wonder Rui Wen's thin body was able to display super-godlike combat results. Perfect harmonization was sometimes even more key than absolute strength. But no matter what Luo Nan's thoughts were, He Yueyin was the highest-ranking commander in the operation. Her orders were absolute. Luo Nan could only order Ink to fly over to the area assigned by He Yueyin. He Yueyin's maintained a high standard for her work as a secretary. She knew that Luo Nan wasn't quite clear about what qualified as a sniper spot, so she even transmitted satellite images of the surrounding area. She also marked out locations that Luo Nan was in charge of and even gave suggestions for patrol routes. Such meticulous work left Luo Nan speechless. As Ink flapped its wings and flew to the predetermined position, the Society's modified deployments for the operation entered the execution stage. The Hexia acted as the main channel of communications during this time, transmitting with psychic waves. The waves covered several dozen square kilometers of area to converge and form a giant, closely woven net that fell outside the scope of senses of normal people. A rapid mobilization had started. Luo Nan was located at the core of this giant net. He clearly felt the layers of interweaving psychic waves. The ripples on the water's surface turned even more distinct. Clearly, this sort of change did not escape Jack. His mood turned even more impatient than before. The crisscross, interweaving psychic waves completely destroyed his search towards the suspicious signal. This was because right now there were suspicious signals coming in all directions all around him. Jack understood now. He was already completely surrounded. A few negative effects finally arrived after the completed transformation of his state of life. Jack knew that it was no use to be impatient, but he was unable to block these emotions. The strength of the society's encirclement was within Jack's expectations, so Jack didn't react drastically because of this. Ultimately, it was Luo Nan's provocation from before that had left him with an extremely bad experience. It was like scattered weed seeds were beginning to germinate and sprout from the pressuring waters of all sides to him. They grew rapidly to consume what was supposed to be nutrients for the core of his willpower. The emotions of disdain and contempt from before had long since flown elsewhere. Jack smashed a heavy fist against the metal plating of the vehicle. He began to clean up the equipment he had yet to finish installing. His efficiency was lower than he had planned for. Of course, Jack owed this all to Luo Nan, even if he didn't know just who was behind the suspicious signal. Jack's reactions were quite interesting, but here on Luo Nan's side, the human-faced arachnid's reactions were not to be outdone. As Jack grew more and more impatient, the human-faced arachnid stirred more and more restlessly. Even though the arachnid wasn't intelligently aware, this sort of hunger instinct passed on information quite clearly. Under interpretation, the human-faced arachnid was approximately saying, "Don't stop, Jack. The nutrition of the spiritual seed decreases when you do." It seemed like the arachnid wasn't going to consume it right now. Luo Nan's mind stirred. Jack's sensitivity to the mental plane had increased to unknown heights under Luo Nan's stimulation. It had increased to at least be able to sense the society's closing encirclement. Even though Luo Nan had faith in He Yueyin's leadership ability, Rui Wen was at hand's reach of Jack. Jack, under the control of his bad emotions, wanted to guarantee his safety. He had added an extra safety precaution. Luo Nan loosed the chains at last, and the human-faced arachnid was freed from its fetters. It let loose on the spot with glee and pounced directly over towards Jack. It must be stated that Jack, having been sharpened by Luo Nan's provocation, had made great strides in his capabilities on the mental plane. Before, he didn't have any ability to detect dark-side life forms like the human-faced arachnid at all. But now he had something like an intuitive reaction when the arachnid came pouncing at him. It allowed him to tense up in an instant and unleashed his mass of probing instruments that could burn the void. What a pity! It was completely ineffective. Jack's emotional thought process was laid completely bare. This was the key irreparable deficit that Jack possessed, and the human-faced arachnid's attack method far exceeded Luo Nan's imagination. The human-faced arachnid didn't open up with a wide mouth to go biting in a single gulp. Jack's synchronized tempo of his body and soul state possessed a certain defensive capability. This dark-side life form possessed a cunning instinct. It went around the frontal defenses by blinking into the void with its weak body. Its core essence had actually transformed into a pulse of information. It let itself be captured by Jack's detection instruments that were coming in all directions, and it entered Jack's completely defenseless emotional thought process in this way. Luo Nan was stupefied when seeing this. Driven by energy, the information-transformed human-faced arachnid was traveling within the Tower of Babel. The collision with its information emitted a reaction in an instant, flashing with a certain dark hue of emotional luster. Luo Nan was able to immediately decipher that this was impatience. This tiny emotional element of impatience rapidly pervaded within Jack's emotional current. It followed the structure of the Tower of Babel, rising step by step. Soon it permeated into the highest level of thought. And so the human-faced arachnid was like a type of virus that gradually pervaded throughout Jack's soul. Luo Nan found this hard to imagine, but this was a fact that he had seen for himself. The human-faced arachnid started doing the real work after making contact with Jack's soul. The first thing it did was weeding. It callously took those high-level thoughts that helped it enter Jack, and it pilfered the core nutrients of willpower, the emotional weeds, to consume them completely. Then it stabbed deep into Jack's soul. Within the abyss of self-awareness that was hard to reach, the human-faced arachnid found its ultimate target. The spiritual seed oozing with the color of blood and greed actually had a subtle glowing halo surrounding it. The human-faced arachnid watched with avid attention and greed the seed that could be eaten at any moment. Yet it didn't make a move. It just concealed itself close by and waited in silence. As for Jack, he suddenly discovered that the irksome emotions of impatience had unexpectedly been blown away after the series of heart-palpitating omens. This was a change that lacked all reason, but the deadly pressure was the best reason. Well, in any case, right now his mind had recovered back to being calm. He could now face the imminent crisis head-on. His gaze fell onto Rui Wen's body. He understood that the source of everything was from the body of this girl who he had monitored and tormented for 3 years. Jack reached out with his hand. He had to have Rui Wen be within his hand's control no matter what. And right at this time, the high-speed moving transport vehicle suddenly went super wide. It simply made one believe that the vehicle had intensely twisted. Actually, the hard bulletproof steel plating of the vehicle really did warp seriously. Then it was torn. Chapter 77, Demon Transformation, Part 2-2. Jack nearly touched Rui Wen's fingers when he was suddenly pulled at least 2 meters apart from her. The color of the dark night sky outside the vehicle was like a turbid river that suddenly crossed between the two. Impossible! Jack's brain instantly calculated out the terrifying and preposterous force required to tear apart the thick bulletproof steel plating by force. He deduced, using the simplest of logic, if this force were to come exploding his way without any attenuation, it would pierce through him completely. Clarity came with this thought. Jack's self-awareness shined with a luster, dispersing the bizarre force that affected him on the mental plane. The color of the darkness of night dividing the twisted and torn vehicle fluctuated with a rainbow luster. The color spiraled a little before fading without a trace. This time, the vehicle really did go wide. It collided with the abandoned site of the ground floor of a large building, but the seriousness was far from what he had felt before. At this time, he found out that all levels of detection instruments had already taken information about EMP attacks and transmitted it over. Yet he had no clue about it. A mental illusion technique. I can be hit by illusion techniques. Inexplicable and complicated emotions surged up in his mind. Then he turned cold and penetrating in an instant once again. It was due to the double effect of receiving the illusion technique and attack just now that caused his body to make the wrong response in confusion. The vehicle had gone super wide, flinging the distance between him and Rui Wen. Jack wanted to use the vehicle's wall behind him to push off and grab the precious treasure that was Rui Wen's body. But then there was a thump behind him right at this time. The sound was heavy and thick. The force was incomparably bizarre. It transmitted through from the outside of the vehicle, causing practically no damage at all before it directly struck into the internals of the exoskeleton armor, into the half-rotten body. It was as if the vibrating force was coming from the center of his chest to disperse outwards, causing the tightly woven Dynamo Core configuration to even tremble slightly. It jolted his body to be paralyzed on the spot. A second thump came, and the two forces overlapped with one another. The two different vibrations interlocked and excited each other. The half-rotten body, whose states was due to Rui Wen's deathly silent ability, had its structure collapse completely to turn into a meaningless dead sack of flesh. The vibration even spread through the good half of the body to lead into the fine penetrating threads of the Dynamo Core. The Dynamo Core now needed to be redeployed. And so Jack still couldn't move. Then came the third thump. The demon eye suddenly flared after Jack donned a cold mask. The omnidirectional detection instruments had already formed an image of the situation outside the vehicle, and the image was projected back. The middle-aged man outside was short and stocky. He wore a casual short-sleeved shirt that was torn at the cuffs from his buff arms. He was the one who had hammered a fist against the vehicle. But there was something strange. The power of his fist was enough to make Jack be stuck in a dilemma within the vehicle. Yet the location where the fist landed on the car remained as smooth as ever. This fighter is at least B rank. As soon as this judgment was formed, dark red flames burned from the rotten flesh within Jack's exoskeleton armor. It exploded outwards with great brightness. The body within the exoskeleton armor burned to ash in an instant. However, the format of fire wasn't affected at all. It was amplified through the armor, and it was blasted out the back. The bulletproof steel plating in the back of the vehicle was approximately 1 meter in radius. It was instantly enveloped by the high temperature. Gathered by the archetype format, the astonishing force of heat didn't spread at all, as it directly conducted its way to the outer layer of the vehicle. A muffled snort came from outside the vehicle. The large-arm fighter's fist had been heated by the high temperature. The fighter had been injured by the power of the format of fire. His sheet of skin, scorched from blackness, forced him to stop his third punch and fall backward. Jack recovered his freedom at last. He disregarded the damage he had done to himself with his instantaneous explosion of flames, and he turned around to go grab Rui Wen. But then he saw the back of the vehicle explode open at this time. The man who he had once crossed fists with before, Crag Burst, charged inside with large laughter. Crag Burst didn't care for anything. He just met Jack in close combat. God damn it. Jack knew he lacked the strength to seize Rui Wen into his hands, and his demon eye darkened in an instant. But then it lit up once more. Even if I can't have Rui Wen, I still have the Dynamo Core. I still have energy. I still am not defeated. Two powerful people like two enormous beasts were inside the wide open vehicle. They engaged in close combat fighting in an instant, bursting forth with strength. It looked like the 5-ton transport vehicle could topple over at any moment. The rescue operation was pretty much over at this time. It had been exceptionally direct and efficient. The surrounding deployed personnel showed themselves one by one, surrounding the transport vehicle to set themselves up against an easy target. He Yueyin stood beneath a cement pillar at the abandoned site. She calmly watched the current situation. Next to her stood an undisciplined little old man. He was yawning over and over. The large-arm fighter, who had been crucial just now, walked back over. His arm already recovered back to normal, being only a bit coarser than that of an ordinary person. He shook his injured arm and spoke with emotion. "Secretary, you even dared to think of using an illusion technique against Jack, this abnormal, altered human. And it was even successful. Not bad, Daydream." Daydream, aka Mr. Bai, was the veteran psychic of the Zia City branch. He responded with a yawn and shook his head. The fluctuation of this man's emotions is very large. The defensive strength he displayed was oddly sloppy. It didn't even match a normal person's defenses to a certain degree. Of course, his logical ability is exceptionally strong, and he recovers quickly. But as long as the first step hits the mark, follow-up steps won't be an issue. He Yueyin rose and faced the large-arm fighter. "I just exchanged some information with Quantum Corporation. Mr. Giant Arm has worked hard. Things wouldn't have gone this smoothly were it not for your contribution with your 2 attacks. I'm ashamed. I was going to land 3 fists, but I never thought that the format of fire from this altered human could be manipulated to this degree." While they were speaking, Crag burst forth from the middle of flames with a rumble, exploding his way out. No matter how brave Crag Burst was, his body was that of flesh and blood. Compared to Jack, who was already composed of complete metal, Crag Burst had quite the headache going on. Jack pushed Crag Burst back with this one explosive attack. Then he walked out with large strides and dropped to the center of the empty ground to face the dozen veteran, awakened of the ability user society head-on. The divide between the strong and the weak was large, yet he had no fear. This boldness made others have a whole new level of respect for him. But Luo Nan, who was floating in the air and observing from above, was a bit embarrassed. What is this human-faced arachnid up to? From Luo Nan's perspective, at least half of Jack's current performance could be owed to the human-faced arachnid. It was this fellow who waited in concealment within the depths of Jack's soul. It was this fellow who constantly guided the emotions their direction. It was this fellow who eliminated practically all of Jack's negative elements. Only in this way did Jack grow braver the more he battled, unleashing his fierce nature from the depths of his heart. Since the human-faced arachnid was implicated in this, now Luo Nan was like an accomplice of Jack. Right now the human-faced arachnid was extremely excited. Its strange and unpredictable instinct spurred it on. It took the most valuable portion of Jack's soul energy and brought it out to inject it into the spiritual seed before its eyes. Right now it wasn't like a fierce darksider life form. Instead, it was like a gardener hard at work. It let the spiritual seed in front of it be washed off of the color of greed and blood so that it could blossom with a more brilliant radiance. Chapter 78, Mind-Devouring Attack Part. Jack never felt this great before. Even though he was surrounded on all sides, even though he lost Rui Wen, the pressure stimulated him to his complete potential. The configuration of the Dynamo Core allowed him to understand how to truly operate energy and information at a high efficiency. The same information converged together and was analyzed, yet he was able to see details from an angle unprecedented. It was penetratingly clear. Even during the most passive moments, he was able to seize the finest details of the changing situation. He didn't have any hesitation or confusion at all. And it was because of this that he didn't shrink back at all, that he had no fear. Besides what was going on externally, there was also himself. Jack was able to sense that the Dynamo Core's strength was encumbered by the crude plans he had made with his steel body. He could only display a small portion of its strength. But this didn't bring his mood down. Instead, it boosted his morale, motivated him. The future was unlimited and broad if he could blast it out. The splendid prospects ignited the true flames in his heart. The energy of the format coiled and knotted, making contact with the flames of his heart to ignite fire anew. The format of fire's color turned even brighter, bringing a faint golden hue to its edges. The veined lines of the warped air merged with the glowing flames to form the fantastic image of the archetype format. The mysterious and marvelous pattern emerged, and then gradually faded to save for an even more powerful force. Jack pulled out a combat knife, and the format of fire spread onto the body of the blade, giving rise to warped rainbow glow. The blade's edge in question forced the ability users of the society to squint their eyes, even though they occupied the absolute advantage. Clap, clap. Giant arm applauded for Jack, whose imposing air was rising higher and higher. I originally thought you were a little injured trafficker. Now I see that you're a trafficker who has a bit of ferocity. The piles and piles of bones beneath the Shang building. Are they meant for you to train your guts, you deranged man? The demon eye behind Jack's multifaceted helmet shot a cold light. Everyone who dies undergoes a special recycling process. Nothing remains of the bones and the like. In the period of Giant Arm's delay, Jack chuckled with great laughter. The sound started as signals being fed into the amplifier, then the sound turned into an explosion as pure flames surged, shaking the entire abandoned level. Luo Nan retreated deeper into the mental plane during Jack's laughter. He didn't do this because of Jack. Instead, he did this because of Daydream Mr. Bai, who stood next to He Yueyin. Luo Nan had heard of Mr. Bai, this psychic, more than once by now. Right now, it seemed that Mr. Bai fully lived up to his reputation. A layer of gauze-like smoke was already circulating on the mental plane. It gradually grew dense without sound or warning. It quietly established an area on the mental plane that was considered to be Mr. Bai's domain, and it permeated towards Jack's direction. Mr. Bai had already unleashed an attack, while Jack was speaking nonsense. Luo Nan had seen this before. When Jack was hit by the illusion, the smoke was made up of several fine and fuzzy-inducing information. They cut into the material plane from the mental plane and manufactured an illusion within the Jack's completely defenseless, yet exceptionally sharp Tower of Babel. The results were 100% miraculous. But right now, there seemed to be some change in the situation. Jack's Tower of Babel was still completely defenseless, but the tempo of the flowing convergence of the energy and information had already increased to another level. Before it was a rushing tide. Now it was crazy leaping flames. The speed, the efficiency, and the intensity all increased to an extremely shocking level. It was still possible to use fake information to deceive Jack, but the information must reach his level of a crazed tempo. This really wasn't Mr. Bai's expertise. And so, the flames burst open the surrounding fog in a mere breath's time. The flames took advantage of the backlash to surge onward and dance on the mental plane. The flames soared. Mr. Bai went humph as the smoke slowly dispersed. Luo Nan had unknowingly squinted his eyes in a purely subconscious manner. He experienced just how dazzling Jack's soul flame was right now. This sort of completely unreserved, completely unconcealed, reckless spray of light could only arise under Jack's special circumstances. For some unknown reason, a very uncomfortable feeling sprouted within Luo Nan's mind. He saw Mr. Bai furrow his brows and take half a step backward subconsciously at this time. Actually, Luo Nan also retreated backward. He tried to conceal himself deeper within the mental plane. This was completely due to Jack. Mr. Bai and Luo Nan probably had a similar feeling. Jack's aura was too dazzling. These people often roamed on the mental plane. They liked the secret feeling of knowing something that others didn't. But Jack was the complete opposite. It was like, oh, a towering cold intent suddenly descended. Luo Nan's uncomfortable feeling in his heart solidified even further. Also at this time penetrated a rattling sound. The dark chains had suddenly started shaking to emit an extremely subtle cry of vibration. It was warning Luo Nan. The human-faced arachnid had been doing farm work within the abyss of Jack's soul until now. It changed its situation practically in sync with the dark chains and started orbiting around the spiritual seed. Its viciousness brought with it a restless agitation. Under the stimulation of all sorts of different omens, Luo Nan's thoughts became alert. He no longer limited his view to a corner. Instead, he expanded it at all costs to his utmost limit. No anomalies appeared within the 1-kilometer diameter range. Ink was flying around with nothing to do near the so-called sniper location, a bit further away when its feathers suddenly expanded outward. It dove down fast amidst a loud core, leaving in a fluster. Just a hair too late. Some fleeting shadow had barely entered the range of his senses. It already left, fading away into the fuzzy dusk of darkness. Luo Nan didn't have time to get over there. He could only rely on his sole office worker. Ink came out of its high-speed flight and then changed its route under Luo Nan's guidance. It swept a circle in the complicated area near the sniper locations. The fleeting shadow re-entered the range of his senses a short 3 seconds later. It was floating up in the empty sky right now, paying no heed to the flapping crow. It just took its 2 columns of 6 devilish eyes and cast its gaze towards the location of Luo Nan and the others, separated by nothing but air. Those eyes were filled with greed and hunger. Luo Nan instantly understood where that uncomfortable feeling had come from. It was true that Jack's completely defenseless energy and information exposed all his emotions and thought processes. There was also his constant sharpening, the rapidly increasing level of his soul's strength. These aspects of Jack didn't contribute much to the mental plane, but the reckless spewing of his soul aura was just as Luo Nan described before. It was a bonfire in the darkness of night. God knows what dangers it may attract. Now the answer had emerged. Human-faced arachnid, yet another human-faced arachnid. This was absolutely a huge variable. Right when Luo Nan was about to inform He Yueyin, the sensing area unfurled over by ink suddenly darkened. A powerful pulse had swept across, containing energy, information, and a corresponding tempo. It exceeded the limit that his senses could bear in an instant. The mental plane suddenly shook intensely in the next moment. A screaming and rushing hurricane came from the unknown, wiping out all of Luo Nan's senses. Chapter 78, Mind-Devouring Attack, Part 2-2. Tonight Luo Nan had witnessed the explosion of 2 EMP grenades. Though they didn't affect them, He could see that people used them before engaging in close combat. They were used to destroy the opponent's sight, hearing, and movement to make it easy to reap in the win. However, Luo Nan never imagined that he would actually encounter a similar electromagnetic attack on the mental plane. The hurricane, which had come from who knows where, stuck to the flat water's surface that was the boundary between the mental plane and the material plane, stirring up havoc. The first to be destroyed was the psychic wave network established between the members of the society. The information that Luo Nan transmitted to He Yueyin flew to God knows where halfway through. Then Luo Nan's mental senses were hit by the attack. It didn't matter the range or the precision, all were pressed down and down again. In the midst of his fluster, Luo Nan discovered that his senses only had a range of 30 meters in radius. The range had shrunk by over 10 times its original size. As for the precision, well, that was a spectacle too horrible to endure. Luo Nan discovered that he was still fine, but Mr. Bai was even worse off than him. This old man looked to have been pierced. The corners of his eyes, his nostrils flowed with blood. He couldn't even stand steadily, falling backward against the pillar. The pillar stopped him from toppling to the ground. This was literally a mental storm. It practically destroyed and overturned all existences on the mental plane, clearing it instantly. Luo Nan could not help having his heart run cold. Just what stage was that human-faced arachnid at? There was only one thing that was worth getting happy over. The connection running between Luo Nan, Inc., and the human-faced arachnid through the format pyramid did not get severed. Luo Nan was even able to send a bit of support to Inc. through the air. The ripples of light from the format pyramid were harbored into Inc.'s black feathers, calming down this little fellow who had received quite the fright. And accordingly, the human-faced arachnid, who was more sensitive than him to a certain degree, transmitted him a warning. Luo Nan already knew this. The human-faced arachnid, parked above the skies of the sniper locations, had already started to invade under the chaotic circumstances. All right, this was a bit confusing. So Luo Nan added a nickname to his own human-faced arachnid, the Wraith Sign. Even though the Wraith Sign was named, it was unintelligent. It couldn't give more information about the trajectory, speed, or the like. It completely failed to understand. But Luo Nan knew that the most likely target was Jack. He was the only one not to be hit by the attack of the mental storm just now. This preferential treatment wasn't targeted at Jack, but at the endlessly maturing spiritual seed. Jack still didn't know that it was his completely unrestrained radiating of his soul aura that incurred this storm. He didn't know he had received great fortune, and at the same time, he didn't know that two human-faced arachnids had their eyes laid upon him. He still felt something even though he wasn't on the receiving end of the attack. He had made a judgment the instant the storm began. The explosive sounds of his laughter and flames rang out without end. His alloy combat knife slashed across as he charged with great brazen. He believed that his opportunity had arrived. It really was his chance. The mental storm had swept across, severing the connections of the psychic wave network. The ability users were stunned, their reactions slow by more than a beat. Yet He Yueyin, acting as the original commander of the operation, maintained her high-speed thought processes. She shouted strictly, "Giant Arm!" She shouted his code name without adding any honorifics, showing just how dire the situation was. The personnel with the most powerful combat ability, Giant Arm, knew that the current situation had gone strange. Yet he knew the duty he was bound to far more. At nearly the instant He Yueyin issued her order, he exerted force and flew vertically. He was only a hair slower than Jack. Giant Arm's chosen trajectory was exceptional. He flew vertically from the side, finding the shortest path to pierce Jack's side wings. His two arms suddenly expanded, bursting the cuffs of his short sleeves completely. He used his bare arms to punch with a heavy fist. Jack didn't even turn to look. The exoskeleton armor was just bait. He could see with the back of his head from the opposite side. Most importantly, the exhaust nozzle on the back suddenly opened. He didn't care about damaging the frame. He forcefully used the highest gear to shoot out a deep blue flame. The terrifying temperature made Giant Arms snort out loud. He forcefully collected his strength to get out of the way, yet Jack increased his speed to his maximum. The alloy combat knife didn't move fancily at all. It was just a simple thrust. With the flames of the format of fire covering the blade, there was no body of flesh and blood that could stop it. The encirclement was already thin. Without the psychic wave network to unify them, they were more like scattered sand. Like parting the seas, the blade's edge pierced through in an instant. Right now, the deep blue walker armor was no longer touching the ground. Under the aid of its auxiliary thrusters, it shot towards the window leading to the outer world from the abandoned floor. Giant Arm, Crag burst, and the others set off in hot pursuit. But compared to the speed of the full force of the exoskeleton armor's thrusters, this task was one impossible to accomplish. The window continued to grow larger as Jack got closer. It swallowed him inside and spat him out into the night sky towards the recycling stratum of Zia City. An explosion sounded. The wall surrounding the window had been bombarded by Giant Arm's fist a step too late, collapsing in an instant. Crushed rocks sprayed outward, but it was all turned to ash when faced with the format of fire. Jack had succeeded. The sky's the limit from here on, the bird soars and the fish leaps. Jack raised his head to look at the night sky of Zia City. Under the blurred colors of the lit city, his vision, his dream for the future, suddenly transformed into a stairway to heaven. His feet hung down from high in the sky. It was at this time that the flames burning in his heart blazed the most ardently. The void rippled with darkness. Jack had attained a very high precision of senses towards the interference on the mental plane with his current level. Naturally, this sort of change couldn't be concealed from him. Yet the human-faced arachnid leaped directly out from the void, giving no leeway for Jack to react at all. The malevolent and terrifying apparition practically stuck to his face as it noiselessly penetrated Jack's exoskeleton armor. Terror had yet to rise in his consciousness. Jack was still manifesting ecstasy and pride externally. His mood was like an explosive flame, but the same burning, devilish flames of the human-faced arachnid enveloped Jack's body in a flash. Under the illumination of the format of fire, the shadow of the human-faced arachnid was clearly superimposed onto Jack. The dense shadow permeated the soaring flames of his soul. An ugly and vicious mouth gaped open to seize the abyss of his soul with accuracy. The spiritual seed, which looked just about to ignite, was swallowed with a single bite. Jack's rising body suddenly froze. The glow of the demon eye darkened. Within the eyes of the pursuing ability users, the exoskeleton armor lost control in midair and fell head first towards the ground. Giant Arm and Crag burst were stunned in front of the window when the sound of the wind suddenly erupted from behind. Another person jumped out from the window. The slender figure blotted the sky and slipped past the rapidly falling exoskeleton armor. Blade and human were one as the format of fire flickered fiercely, and was directed into the sheet of void that was the curtains of the night. Behind the curtains of the night, the human-faced arachnid was savoring the delicacy it just ate when the blade light arrived. He Yueyin. Her target wasn't Jack, but the human-faced arachnid. Mr. Bai, who had been standing next to He Yueyin, took temporary command of the operation in this moment. He endured the pain of his injured soul and loudly announced the situation. A human-faced arachnid has been discovered. This is the third case. As Mr. Bai's voice was unleashed, Luo Nan was jolted on the mental plane. This was because he saw something at this time. It was yet another hurricane that swept across the material and the mental planes. The hurricane came screaming. Right now, the human-faced arachnid was using all its strength to evade He Yueyin's blade light. It absolutely didn't have any strength to spare for an attack. Luo Nan suddenly understood something. The mental storm isn't caused by the human-faced arachnid. There's some other power behind the scenes. Chapter 79, Furnace Prison Part. The mental storm descended once again. This disturbance was different in nature from the previous EMP-style storm. This mental storm clearly had an increased suppressive strength against its main targets, Mr. Bai Giant Arm, Crag Burst. These veteran ability users with exceptional strength were all the main targets of this attacks. And of these people, Mr. Bai was once again the worst off. Giant Arms and Crag Burst's strength mainly relied on the material plane. Their harmonized tempo between body and soul may not have been as perfect as the peak that was Rui Wen, but they had reached an excellent level without difficulty. In addition, their mind was encoded by the natural chemical carriers of the brain, so they possessed some defensive ability. Only Mr. Bai, whose majority of power was on the mental plane, took the attack like a stuck-out nail being hammered down. Naturally, he took the attack more critically than the others. And even worse, he was the temporary commander. Mr. Bai already toppled to the ground. His hands were arranged in a strange sign as he gravely protected his mind from destruction. He lost the ability to speak commands for a time. The 7-8 remaining ability users could only follow their contingency plan when faced with this situation. They surrounded Mr. Bai in a circle and placed the unconscious Rui Wen inside. They held the breath and stood vigilant, putting all their strength on the defensive. Crag Burst and Giant Arm saw everything that happened from the window. They cursed in their hearts. Clearly, Mr. Bai couldn't be counted on for some time. The two faced the assault of the mental storm. Though their force of bravery was astonishing, they needed some time to adapt to the distortion of their senses and consciousness, to the increasing layers of pressure. And so, they were more than a beat too late to go back and help Mr. Bai or to provide He Yueyin with support. They could only watch He Yueyin with open eyes. They watched her leap out of the window and face the void of the curtain of the night with one blade to slay. Luo Nan's soul body was floating within the night sky, witnessing He Yueyin's stunning and outstanding blade technique once again. He Yueyin was a burner, yet from all the situations Luo Nan had seen before, she was the sole and only burner who had completely mastered and subjugated the format of fire. She stripped the format of fire of its husk and used the strength of the format of fire to reinforce her blade with pure power. It was completely under control of her will. She used a strength from the mental plane to forcefully annihilate the target on the mental plane. The format of fire was merely a power source from her perspective. She had a set of self-logic that was far more severe, and she used it to drive this power. Perhaps this was the secret behind her astonishing blade arts. The human-faced arachnid did not dare to receive the blade. It did its utmost to dodge. The perfect method the human-faced arachnid used to hunt junk was used by He Yueyin back onto it. The opportunity had been grasped. The tempo had been seized. The human-faced arachnid was in dire straits while digesting the spiritual seed. A blade dropped down right when the arachnid was caught, severing 4 of its limbs from half its side. The limbs transformed into smoke and nothingness. The human-faced arachnid let out a pained howl. Its figure turned wraith-like as it headed towards the void. He Yueyin tried to adjust her attack, but then giant arm and crag burst were victims of the mental storm. Reinforcements were late by a beat. The tempos of the front and back were different. And He Yueyin, her figure high in the air, had little margin to change her attack. A sudden omen rose in Luo Nan's mind. He let loose his thought. Careful. Luo Nan could see things clearly now. The second wave's mental storm purposely avoided He Yueyin to cause this frontline commander to be on a different beat than the others. Then the third wave descended. It was an attack that specifically targeted He Yueyin. This attack wasn't a mental storm, but a blinding lightning that pierced out from the mental plane. Luo Nan warned just in time. Even though He Yueyin's body was falling rapidly in midair, she slashed her blade in front of her chest, and the tempo of her body and soul instantly turned solid and steady. Uglashi. The alloy blade within He Yueyin's hand actually let loose the sound of metal clashing, trembling for some unknown reason. And so, the turmoil against He Yueyin's body and soul had been defended. But no one, be it Luo Nan or He Yueyin, had any intentions of relaxing. The void rippled once more. The malevolent human-faced arachnid appeared with the special skill to blink in and out. It suddenly made its move during a sliver of chance, seizing the instant He Yueyin's body and soul tempo was in disarray. It flawlessly coordinated with the hidden power from far in the distance. Siege Hammer. This mental attack was the specialization of the human-faced arachnid. The Siege Hammer displayed its might once more. The alloy blade rang out again, and its trembling intensified. He Yueyin's synchronization between her body and soul wasn't amazing. A crack clearly split from the bombardment of the Siege Hammer. She would need 1 to 2 seconds in order to adjust back her tempo. The human-faced arachnid wouldn't give her the chance. It hissed sharply on the mental plane. Its 6 devilish eyes flared simultaneously. It sought to capture this gap and plunder the greatest fruits of war. Have you had enough? Luo Nan couldn't stand by and watch. He lashed out with his thoughts, which were none other than a signal. The demonic body of this arrogant human-faced arachnid suddenly froze. Its 6 devilish eyes, which had been glowing with extraordinary splendor, each had a spell of confusion. At first it was blank, then it reacted. But then it saw the dark chains suddenly manifest on the mental plane. The chains stretched perfectly straight. One end was still pierced into the depths of the void. The other end had linked up and even pierced into its chest. It was unknown when this happened. The unintelligent human-faced arachnid was incapable of understanding its current circumstances. But instinct was able to let it know that this situation was extremely bad. It shrieked loudly, and its demonic body leaped into the air to fly. It wanted to break free from the chains that were both real and incorporeal. This only made the chains rattle and shake. Information traveled through the chains, endlessly feeding back to allow Luo Nan to vividly sense what the internals of the man-spider demon were like from the other side of the chains. It was a furnace of hell, one of deepness and murkiness. Flames sprayed out. A sea of fire churned. Here, the greatest thing that Luo Nan could sense was the high temperature. Of course, this was only an understanding through sensing. It was very hard to imagine that the human-faced arachnid darksider life form contained a high-temperature furnace of over tens of thousands degrees. This should be a sort of structure with the terrifying strength to melt and fuse, to consume awareness. Within this place, chaotic fragments of information and emotion were like overgrown weeds. Once in a while, the spraying flames would make contact with a weed, causing just a hint of awareness to form. Then this awareness shrieks as it melts and fuses into the sea of flames, into the furnace. Then the cycle begins anew. Right in the middle of the terrifying furnace of hell, Luo Nan locked onto the spiritual seed that had just been plucked from the depths of Jack's soul. The outer layer of the seed had already been melted away within this furnace of hell, but it was just the outer layer. When the outer husk was digested away, a bit of devilish motley light of awareness leaped out from the middle. Luo Nan's dark chains reverberated closely, resisting the fatal flowing flames all around and illuminating the format pyramid structure down to a strict standard. The tetrahedron, the inscribed sphere, and the circumscribed sphere emerged clearly. The unique structure dominated a small region, giving some time for the motley glow of light to grow. In the blink of an eye, the devilish motley light enlarged rapidly. 8 legs extended out. 6 colored eyes flickered with different colors. The half-arachnid, half-human body stood stooped in its habitual manner, yet it possessed the savage tension to kill its prey at any moment. And so this was the manifestation of a human-faced arachnid, of Luo Nan's Wraith Sign. It had manifested within the stomach of another human-faced arachnid. Chapter 79, Furnace Prison Part 2-2. The furnace of hell displayed ample rejection towards the alien body that was the Wraith Sign. The fiery sea churned up large, thick bubbles, showing a deep magma-like structure. The glowing flames flowed in the sky above the fiery sea like a giant dancing python, roaring and seeking to consume the Wraith Sign. The furnace of hell wasn't like the stomach of a darksider life form. Instead, it was like being in the middle of an enormous world. It had the feeling of fantasy from a dimensional world. The Wraith Sign didn't rush to fight, to destroy, when faced with this environment. It just raised its head to the sky and howled. Bloody lifelike flames burned around its body, attuning with the format pyramid on the outside. It took the special structural form of the format pyramid and expanded it out layer by layer. Within the core of the furnace of hell, lines of different thickness traveled and crisscrossed to construct one basic structure after another. They joined and interlinked to form a complicated bodily whole. This scene was familiar in this way. It was just like the mystical altar within the fighting arena of the Shang building. That's right, the Wraith Sign had erected a new altar. The one before was founded atop the turbid flowing emotions of several hundred spectators, and the one now was built in the middle of this furnace of hell. Luo Nan's 2 eyes had been grasping in the dark when it came to the previous altar. He knew how, but not why. Yet when he touched the Tower of Babel established by the Dynamo Core, when Jack selflessly revealed his process, Luo Nan understood the structural rules behind the operation of energy and information. And he had grasped soul breathing as well. So he gradually came to experience the marvels of interfering and intercommunicating between the material and mental planes. Now it seemed that he had some sense of an understanding. Luo Nan noticed that the structures of the two altars were extremely similar. They didn't seem to possess inherent differences. The rules behind their operation especially didn't seem different. Namely, the way they handled energy and information was precisely the same. A simple logical deduction made the following known. The same form would often lead to the same content. Since the structure was as such, the existing foundation shouldn't be too different. In other words, the foundation behind this furnace of hell is, in fact, similar in nature to the spectators of the fighting arena. The only difference is that one is manifested as a turbid flow of emotions, the other is manifested as a furnace of hell. Luo Nan's interest increased as he looked. The turbid flow rooted in human emotions and desire can actually develop into a different form and possess a different function. Could this sort of transformation be attributed to the human-faced arachnid? Or is there some other influential factor? Holding his question and enlightenment, Luo Nan observed this furnace of hell and felt an increase in clarity and understanding. The Wraith Sign pushed onward, advancing the process of building the altar. The giant flame python, which had been battering and disturbing the Wraith Sign from the outside, gradually stopped. The thick bubbles within the fiery sea of magma burst open to clearly reveal the distorted faces of humans. Hatred, terror, or perhaps fever all cast glaring gazes at the Wraith Sign. But no matter what they did, they were unable to prevent the continuous expansion, the continuous perfection of the altar's structure. And as various functionalities were laid out, the intimidating might of these faces fell down the road of decline. Things were just this interesting. It didn't matter how terrifying and tragic the environment was. As soon as the altar was erected, some had become the priest, and some had become the sacrifice. Some possessed the power of domination. Some were just stupid livestock. It was a sort of distinction of statuses that was callous and clear. The terrifying setting of the furnace of hell continued on. It may possess the enormous force to consume awareness and melt souls, but due to its status assigned by the altar, it couldn't cause any threats at all to the Wraith Sign atop the altar. In other words, the Wraith Sign used an altar to suppress the furnace of fire. At the same time, it was stripping more basic things from this fiery prison. The furnace of hell was suppressed upon the construction of the altar. The human-faced arachnid, which had been pierced by the dark chains, grew all the more impatient and uneasy. It even revealed a response of terror. It suddenly shrieked, and disregarding everything, broke through the void to leave. This situation was like the one on the warship back in the day. The scenario of Luo Nan being dragged by the burning wraith appeared once again. There was a problem though. Luo Nan was no longer an inexperienced child, even though only a few days had passed. He had a deep understanding of the human-faced arachnid already through the Wraith Sign. He didn't need to be scared about facing off against it head only. After all, he had already placed a mischief maker, like the Monkey King, inside his opponent's stomach. Freeze, the dark chains shook. The power of the format, my heart's a prison, was injected inside the chains. The altar was causing chaos within the human-faced arachnid. The chains seized the arachnid in its grasp, and it had taken a blade blow from He Yueyin, harming its energy. Its strength to resist dropped and dropped. Though it had clearly stepped through space to leave, it was actually forcefully dragged back by Luo Nan. This rippling and ringing movement was far too strong. Not only was He Yueyin able to feel the anomaly close by, The mysterious power from far in the distance was startled and terrified, scattering quite a bit of its mental power. The most direct effect was as follows. His follow-up killing move aimed at He Yueyin was severed, allowing He Yueyin to fall to the ground safely and retreat. Then at the top of the abandoned floor, Giant Arm and Crag broke free of the mental suppression. The three grouped together in the blink of an eye, retreating to Mr. Bai's position. The members of the society in the defensive circle were at a loss during this time. As soon as Giant Arm, Crag burst, and He Yueyin returned, the three stood separately to form a triangular structure within the ring-shaped defensive circle. He Yueyin issued an order with a deep voice, giving everyone a clear command. Reboot your hexaspheres. Choose the local area network architecture option. Every one of the society members completed this step in the blink of an eye. A LAN of psychic waves was then established. Energy and information intercommunication between each member of the society, forming an external cooperative strength. And based on He Yueyin's allocation of privileges. He Yueyin, Giant Arm, and Crag Burst formed three stable support nodes of the LAN. All transfers of energy and information had to pass through these nodes in order to complete successfully. And so, the pressure of the mental storm attack was completely placed upon these three. And finally, Mr. Bai was given the chance to catch his breath within this LAN. He slowly recovered his energy and relied on the deep underlying functions of the hexasphere to filter everyone's cooperative strength and form an impressive torrent of energy and information. Upon passing through He Yueyin, Giant Arm, and Crag Burst, the torrent burst apart the pressure of the mental storm, casting the storm out into the boundless abyss of the night sky. He linked up to the psychic wave network in the blink of an eye. The special form of information and energy opened up special privileges within the society's psychic wave network. Warning and aid request signals were blasted out immediately and were received by those in charge of the society. The ability user society of Xia City was in complete activity within a short few seconds. What just happened? Luo Nan had hidden deeper within the mental plane after reigning in the human-faced arachnid. He wanted to avoid a likely retaliatory attack from the mysterious power. But the attack he anticipated never arrived. Instead, his hexasphere, which had been damaged by the jamming from the mental storm, crackled with noise. Then it transmitted intermittent information. Personnel confirmed the interfering source. Attack authorizations have been unlocked. All members prepare for the assault. The skies of Xia City seemed to light up in the next moment. Chapter 80, Preparing the Sacrifice, Part 1-2. A high-rise community was located approximately 1,500 meters away from the abandoned floor where He Yueyin, Jack, and the others were at. Looking down from here, one could just so happen to see the area of the abandoned floor and its surroundings within one's vision. This was none other than the sniper location pointed out by He Yueyin. It was also Ink's area of activity. This rather intelligent crow had sincerely and obediently concealed itself within the building of some bell tower during the first eruption of the mental storm. Its pair of wings lifted up to cover its head. It did not move at all. It was true that Ink had nothing to do with the attack area of the mental storm, being 1,500 meters away. But the problem laid in the person who had unleashed the mental storm. Ink was far too close to that person. They were merely separated by a large bell. Above the crow, who was shrinking back its head, at the roof of the bell tower was a mass of turbid black smoke that formed a faintly discernible figure. It was perfectly merged into the deep darkness of night. Only two eye-like shapes flickered with faint sparks, bringing a hint of man to this black smoke. Such a form was like a demon, like a monster, captivating one's soul in terror. Compared to the might displayed with the three powerful waves of mental storms from before, this smoke man displayed a mood of annoyance and frustration. The human-faced arachnid should have left after eating, but it made two more moves. This is especially rule-breaking. The smoke man was able to feel the activation of the psychic wave network that covered this area. He could feel that the power of the controller of the psychic wave network could fully transmit a tyrannical attack crossing several hundred kilometers by using the ability users on the abandoned floor as guides. If he had the chance, he would be very happy to go to the front door of the Wilderness Explorers Society of Xia City and give a good scolding to the shameless behavior of Ouyang Chen. But now, it was too late to say anything. It may seem that he was reckless for not fleeing with all his strength as his first reaction. This wasn't because he didn't find the chance to. The hunting and eating human-faced arachnid had some annoying troubles appear. This arachnid was the greatest hope for the secret order to breed out sacrifices. He couldn't just toss it away without concern, no matter what. Those damned chains break for me. The smoke man really didn't give a damn anymore. He went all out. He glared at the area of psychic pressure that was growing all the more terrifying, and he simply tore off some turbid smoke from his smoke soul body to cast it up in the air. The smoke conducted a transformation on the mental and material planes, rapidly tempering into the form of a blade edge. It hovered above the human-faced arachnid, which was locked in place by chains, and it manifested with a radiating sharpness as it cleaved downward. This smoldering blade was not only about to sever the chains, it sought to cleave through the shameless amateur hiding deep on the mental plane with his head concealed, but tail leaking out. Only this would get rid of the resentment in the smoke man's heart. The smoke man never thought that the blade carrying his fury and hatred would cleave nothing but air. The dark chains vanished from thin air, going who knows where, and the human-faced arachnid inexplicably recovered its freedom. It remained frozen there in place. Its malevolent face looked quite stupefied. It's the blood flame blessing. In times of mortal peril, how would the smoke man take the time to think? Right now the abandoned floor was without light, yet it was bright. The activation of the psychic wave network had nearly materialized. More and more energy was being transferred over, long since locking him there firmly. If he didn't flee now, he really wouldn't need to spend any more effort. Go, go, go. He used a specialized control method to give the human-faced arachnid an order. He made it escape off into a different direction. The smoke man didn't forget what the people of the Ability User Society were up to in the past 2 days within Xia City. Even if his few waves of mental storms didn't attract animosity, this fellow was the original prime target of the Ability Society's attacks. Under his spurring, the human-face arachnid's devilish eyes finally recovered a bit of their luster. It immediately leaped upwards into the sky to disappear without a trace. At practically the same time, the smoke man leaped out from the bell tower to flee towards the area where he felt the flow of people was the densest. He hoped to find a few people as meat shields, to let Ouyang Chen avoid doing the unthinkable. But then, in the end, he was a bit too late. The instant the smoke man leaped out from the bell tower, a terrifying energy assault burst forth from the abandoned floor 1,500 meters away. A mental storm descended in the next moment. It was absolutely a retaliation. It was a mental storm as well. This attack, which originated from Aoyang Chen, had lost quite a bit of its exquisite from the long-distance transmission and guidance. But when this mental storm swept across, it still made the smoke soul body fall into an unavoidable predicament. The smoke soul body, a soul in an out-of-body state, split itself into pieces with a few breaths of effort. The soul of the smoke man was exposed in the air, nearly being annihilated when the storm's tail swept through him. Even though he had powerful strength, even though he was long past his inexperienced years of his soul being unable to take a breeze of wind, he disregarded everything and flew down hard. He flew until he reached the night show within the middle of these group of buildings. He was only convinced of his escape when he had reached this noisy and chaotic atmosphere. Today's grazing was a huge failure, Yang Chen. This marks a feud between us. The smoke man vented his hate as he breathed in the air of people within this night show. He resolidified a layer of his smoke soul body as temporary means. He confirmed that he wouldn't die, and he began to worry about the human-faced arachnid's condition. He increased his senses slightly. The human-faced arachnid wasn't too far away, it was still roaming around. This was a bit dangerous. Oh, he had found it. The smoke man was actually a bit happy for a time. He had received this control technique from another secret order. Even though the origin was unknown, the results were quite nice. If the technique wasn't like this, it would have been impossible for him to raise the human-faced arachnid to this level within a short few days. Most of the people at the night show were young men and women playing through the night. Emotions were born in abundance, allowing for a turbid flow to permeate all over. It was also a good place to hide the human-faced arachnid. The people of the ability user society certainly had quite the influence to search for traces of the human-faced arachnid all over the place. The smoke man had suffered a large decrease in his strength today. He would need to recover a bit of energy. At the same time, he would let the members of the secret order come with reinforcements to ensure his complete safety. The human-faced arachnid traveled noiselessly here amidst his pondering, stopping next to him. Its appearance was malevolent and terrifying, but 3 of its limbs had been severed, so had a bit of a sorry appearance. The strength cleaved away from this blade. I don't know if the meal it just ate would be enough to make up for it. The smoke man took over the human-faced arachnid. He didn't quite understand the nature of this dark-side-of-life form, for it hadn't even been 2 days. He guessed randomly and was at a loss for a time, but he was able to observe greater details. Oh, flames were shining brightly within the body of the human-faced arachnid. They flowed and operated with rules and patterns. Could it be that it was already starting to digest the meal it just ate? Right when he was assessing things with great interest, he saw a stream of glowing flames pierce through the back of the human-faced arachnid, splitting it open. The smoke man became stunned. The flames spread out in an uncontrollable manner. Fiery light burst from various places all over the human-faced arachnid's body, like thousands of sharp blades. One blade cut after another. The human-faced arachnid could only struggle in futility until a tongue of flame gushed out and burned its entire body, burning it into a sheet of nothingness in the blink of an eye. The smoke man was stupefied for a time upon seeing this scene. His mind was completely blank. Then, after the human-faced arachnid had been burned away by the raging flames, the flames actually didn't disperse. Instead, they compressed together to form a vortex in the void. A boom sounded from inside. A malevolent and terrifying demon drove the flames and soared out from the center of the vortex. 6 devilish eyes and 8 long legs. If it wasn't a human-faced arachnid, then what was it? That's a wrap for this installment. Thank you all for watching and supporting Lord of the Stories. If you enjoyed this tale, please hit the like button, share it, and subscribe for more amazing stories. You can also explore other series updated daily in our playlists. Have a fantastic day and see you in the next episode.